Okay, so you want to know the fastest way to master English. We've got this really detailed outline here for a podcast episode, all about like becoming fluent.
Yeah.
And it's got some really cool tips.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're gonna do a deep dive into these tips, and hopefully you can take some of this and really put it into practice.
Sounds good.
So this first tip is about surrounding yourself with English. Like they call it immersion.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this whole idea of immersion?
I think it's really important, and it's one of the best ways to learn a language.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it. How did you learn your first language? You didn't learn it from a textbook, right?
Yeah.
You learned it by being surrounded by it.
Yeah.
Hearing people speak it all the time and just kind of absorbing it naturally. And so the best way to learn a new language is to try to recreate that environment as much as possible.
So it's almost like you're training your brain to think in English, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you're getting your brain used to the sounds of the language, the rhythms of the language, the grammar, the vocabulary, all of it. And the more you do that, the more natural it will become for you to speak and understand English.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So like what are some ways that people can kind of immerse themselves? Obviously, like watching movies and TV shows would be one way.
Yeah, movies and TV shows are great. You know, also listening to music, listening to podcasts.
Right.
You can even change the language on your phone and your computer to English.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You know, just surround yourself with as much English as possible.
So I guess the main takeaway here is just make English as much a part of your life as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. The more you can make it a part of your everyday life, the faster you're going to learn.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. So the next tip that we've got here in this outline is something called the repeat and shadow technique. And I gotta say, I don't really know what that means. Can you break that down?
Yeah, sure. So basically what you do is you find a recording of a native English speaker, like maybe a podcast or a YouTube video, and you listen to it and then you repeat what you hear.
Okay.
And you try to imitate their pronunciation as closely as possible.
So is it kind of like karaoke?
Yeah, kind of, except instead of singing, you're just speaking.
Right.
But the idea is the same. You're trying to match the rhythm and the intonation of the original speaker.
So what makes this such a good technique? Like, what does it actually help with?
Well, for one thing, it helps you improve your pronunciation.
Yeah.
Because you're really focusing on how the words are supposed to sound. But it also helps you to improve your listening skills.
Okay.
Because you have to pay very close attention to what the speaker is saying in order to be able to repeat it. And it also helps you to improve your fluency because you're getting practice speaking English in a natural way. Yeah.
So it's a really good all-around exercise for improving your English skills.
So how should people choose like what to listen to? Like how do they pick the right material?
Well, I would say start with something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Because you're more likely to stick with it if you're enjoying it.
Right.
If you're interested in sports, find a podcast about sports. If you're interested in music, find a podcast about music.
Yeah.
And then, just start listening and repeating.
And just listen and shadow away.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we're going to move on now to tip number 3, which is conversation practice. Now, this one seems pretty self-explanatory, right? Like, if you want to learn how to speak English, you got to practice speaking English.
Yeah, it seems obvious, but a lot of people actually don't get enough practice speaking.
Right.
They might be afraid to make mistakes, or they might not have anyone to practice with. But it's really important to find opportunities to speak English as much as possible. Yeah, and this kind of goes back to that point about immersion, right? Here's one thing to hear it and to be surrounded by it, but you also have to use it.
Yes, exactly. The more you use it, the better you're going to get at it.
So for someone who, maybe doesn't have a lot of opportunities, or maybe they're just a little nervous to practice speaking, what are some things that they can do?
Well, there are a lot of different things that you can do. There are online language exchange websites and apps where you can find people to practice with. There are also conversation groups that meet in person.
Oh, cool.
In a lot of cities and towns. And if you don't have access to those things, you can always just talk to yourself.
That's a good idea.
Practice speaking out loud, even if you're just talking to yourself.
So it's just a matter of finding ways to actually speak, to actually use the language.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Everyone makes mistakes when they're learning a language. It's part of the process.
Okay, great. So our last tip here is about language learning apps.
Oh, yeah.
And there are a lot of them out there.
There are a ton of them, yeah.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on language learning apps? Are they helpful? Are they not?
I think they can be helpful.
Okay.
I wouldn't rely on them exclusively, but they can be a good supplement to other forms of language learning.
Right.
They can be good for learning vocabulary, for practicing grammar, and just for getting some extra exposure to the language.
But they're not a magic solution.
No, definitely not a magic solution. You're not going to become fluent just by using an app.
Right.
You still need to do all the other things that we've talked about, like immersion and conversation practice.
Yeah.
But apps can be a helpful tool.
So how do you choose like a good language learning app? Because like you said, there's so many.
Yeah, there are a lot. I would say the best way to choose one is to just try out a few different ones and see which ones you like the best.
Yeah.
Most of them have free trials, so you can try them out before you commit to paying for them.
Right.
And just see which ones you find most engaging and helpful.
And just experiment and see what works.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay, so that was a deep dive into 4 great tips.
Yeah.
From this podcast episode outline that we have. Just to kind of recap quickly, the 4 tips are to immerse yourself in the language.
Right.
Try the repeat and shadow technique.
Yeah.
Make sure you're getting plenty of conversation practice in. And then use those language learning apps as a supplement.
That's right.
Yeah, cool. So what do you think? Are there any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
I would just say that learning a new language takes time and effort, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
And it's so rewarding. So just be patient with yourself.
Yeah.
And keep practicing, and you will get there.
And you will get there eventually.
That's right.
I like it. All right, so I guess the last question I have for you and for all of our listeners is, what are you going to do? What's the first step that you're going to take?
Good question.
Yeah, what are you going to do to improve your English today or this week?
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. All right, well, thanks for joining us, and we will see you all next time.
See you next time.
Bye.